To replace the left side large Platen support bracket or the right side small Platen support bracket on the GST-1H tortilla warmer, you would need a Phillips screwdriver, preferably a T-handle 3/16 hex key, slotted screwdriver, and a 7/16 nut driver or open-end wrench. Turn the power button off on the toaster and unplug the power cord from the outlets. Use suitable gloves to handle hot surfaces as necessary. Take a slotted screwdriver and rotate the lock lever clockwise towards the unlock position. Swing the door open and completely remove from the latch. To unlatch this mechanism, lift this bottom bracket up. Use your thumbs to pull the upper lever away from the frame to release support on the top and the bottom. In order to remove the top belt, we have to release tension and elevate the platen. On this side, you need to pull this pin out, push this mechanism bracket up, push the pin back in so that it locks into the orifice. On the other side, same thing, pull the pin out, push up, and push the pin back in. This elevates the platen to facilitate removal of the belts. Next, we have to compress the roller in and up at both ends to release tension. Then carefully slide the belt out. To replace the smaller right-hand Platen lock lever, use a 3/16 Allen wrench, T-handle preferably, and remove the two supporting hex head bolts. Lefty-loosey. With the old bracket and the two hex head bolts removed, now you can position the new bracket. With the new small right-hand side Platen lock lever, if the pin is protruding, you must pull it away and rotate it to retract it to make this area flush. Position it directly below this top hole. Then you would take one bolt and line it up with the orifice in the platen. It may be necessary to wedge a cardboard or a suitable screwdriver so you can lift or lower the platen threaded hole to line up with the bolt. This may take a couple tries. Make sure you manually insert the bolt until it starts to engage the threads. Next, insert the left-hand bolt into the same orifice on the opposite side of the bracket. Again, use a suitable screwdriver or tool to carefully lift up on the platen to line up the holes, and then manually thread it in to ensure we do not cross-thread it. Next, take your 3/16 and complete the process by making both bolts snug. With both bolts secured, lift the mechanism up and down to ensure that the mechanism floats freely. With the pin pulled out towards you, we have to engage it into this top empty hole. So push the mechanism up and engage the pin by pushing it in. Ensure that this pin is engaged with the top hole. Again, this is only for removal of the belts or replacement of the lock levers. Next, we will replace the larger left-hand side Platen support bracket. But first we need to remove the outer service panel. To remove the service panel, remove the outer 6 screws completely and just loosen up the bottom 3 screws. Remove the side access service panel and set aside. Locate these 3 hex bolts. These we do not touch. Slightly below to the left, you have a hex bolt here, and to the right, another hex bolt. Remove these 2 hex bolts using a 3/16 T-handle. With the 2 bolts extracted from this bracket, leave this bracket in place. Do not touch it. We are not replacing this bracket. Use a Phillips screwdriver and remove the 4 outer Phillips screws in order to remove this top access panel. With the 4 Phillips screws removed, carefully lift up the top cover assembly and set aside. With the top cover access removed, we're going to remove these 3 hex nuts using a 7/16 nut driver. Notice how this bracket pivots. These nuts should never be fully tightened where it pinches this bracket. With the 3 hex nuts removed, now you can pull away the old left side large Platen lock lever. Take the new left hand large Platen support bracket, pull this pin out and rotate it so that the pin is recessed as shown. This area needs to be flush up against this wall temporarily. Position the bracket as shown and then reinstall the 3 hex nuts. Manually install the 3 hex nuts, but do not tighten. We should not tighten the 3 nuts to avoid this movement. We need to place a dime between the plate and the underside of each of the 3 nuts to determine the correct gap. As you can see here, I have a dime positioned. Tighten and snug up the hex nut until a dime fits snugly on all 3. Okay, with the correct gap of a dime, this would allow the mechanism to move up and down as required, which will be demonstrated later in this video. Again, do not tighten these nuts completely, otherwise this bracket will be pinched and it would not allow for vertical movement, which will affect the toaster operation and result in a callback. Once again, retract this pin out and rotate and test the mechanism to ensure that it moves up and down freely. Then push it all the way down so we can attempt to reinstall the 2 hex bolts from inside the service panel, as will be demonstrated shortly. Next, take one of the bolts, insert it through the bracket, and we need to guide it into the threaded hole of the Platen. Again, you may need to lift up, down, or front to back the Platen in order to guide the bolt into the hole and manually thread it to avoid any stripping. With both bolts manually installed and snugged up with the T-handle, ensure that the mechanism moves up and down freely. If it does not, one of these bolts may have pinched the bracket to the firewall. In that case, you need to loosen up and readjust. Also make sure the 3 hex nuts on the opposite side that were spaced with the dime are also not binding with the bracket. With the bracket secured in place, make sure this pin is pulled out and test the mechanism once again to ensure that the mechanism moves up and down freely, which elevates and drops down this platen. If the mechanism does not move up or down, that means one of these hex nuts has been pinching the bracket, or one of the two bolts on the inside of the service panel need to be inspected and readjusted as necessary. Next, lift the mechanism bracket up, push the pin in to engage the hole. With the bracket elevated and the pin locked into the orifice, move to the opposite side and lift the bracket on this side up and push the pin in to engage with the hole. This would elevate the bracket and the platen to allow for reinstallation of the top belt. Also make sure that the front idler roller is pushed in and up to compress the spring at both ends, making installation of the belt easier. Reinstall the top access panel, line up, and secure with the 4 Phillips screws. Next, take the belt and carefully guide it around the left side and the right side as shown here. You may need to carefully lift up on the bracket to allow for additional clearance. Once the belt is started, slide it down in a rotating motion. Continue sliding the belt on in a rotating fashion. Once the belt is installed and appears to be lined up, release the tension on the front roller by pushing down, which applies tension to the belt. Once again, make sure the belt is in line with the grooves on both rollers. To engage the lock lever, take your hands and lift this bottom bracket up to engage the bracket underneath. Push the top lever in to engage the top and push all the way in until firmly engaged. Next, for normal operation of the toaster, pull the pin back out, which allows the mechanism to drop, including the top platen. This will allow the tortilla product to be compressed and heated. Repeat it on the opposite side by pulling the pin out and ensure the mechanism drops down both ends. If the mechanism does not drop down, the customer's product would not be heated to their standards. Reinstall the side service panel and secure it with the 6 screws removed. Reinstall the side door on the hinge. Make sure you engage it correctly. Rotate the lever towards the unlock position. Close the door completely and rotate counterclockwise to lock it. Plug the power cord into the appropriate outlet. Turn the power on. Allow the unit to preheat and test for proper operation. Once again, if the customer's product is not heated to their standards, make sure you check both top lock mechanisms to ensure that they're in a completely downward state to apply pressure on the customer's product from both ends, left side and right side. Call the factory if any technical support is necessary at 877-392-7854.